All right, we've got big breaking news coming in. India and China have agreed on disengagement along the line of actual control. Both India and China will restart patrolling along the LAC. An agreement here has been reached on disengagement. Patrolling will begin on both sides and both have mutually agreed to disengage. This comes after a lot of attempts to go ahead and have dialogue from both sides. Patrolling arrangements, as per the latest reports, have been brought for disengagement and resolution of the situation at hand. Geeta Mohan is joining us with more details on this big development and breakthrough. This, Geeta, does this also mean that we're going to see a bilateral take place in Russia on the sidelines of the BRICS?
Well, expectedly so, but again, no confirmation from either side on bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping. But the fact that the patrolling will start again at LAC is big news, and that both sides have started disengagement. There were a few of the finger points and friction points, that certainly still were being held by the Chinese side. And if disengagement has begun and the Chinese troops are going to withdraw from those areas, that is a very big and huge development. This comes after a very long time and many rounds of military level as also diplomatic level talks between the two sides. Finally, we're looking at India and China coming to an understanding, and like India has been insisting that China should go back to its earlier positions in the line of actual control between India and China, and that the patrolling that used to go on in those areas by both sides should continue the manner in which it was being done earlier. So if that has begun, and if the two sides have come to an agreement on disengagement, and the fact that India and China will start patrolling again, that's a huge development on the India-China front, and certainly paves the way for the leadership for a leadership level meeting. Remember, Akshita, since then there have been foreign minister level meetings, but there have been no leadership level bilateral meetings, full-fledged bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping. With the development, it does seem like in Kazan, on the sidelines of the BRICS summit, the leaders could very well meet.
It's definitely set the stage for that. The timing of this decision and breakthrough will lead to speculation on whether we're going to be seeing a Modi-Xi pull aside on the sidelines of the BRICS. I want to bring in Shivani Sharma for more details on this. Shivani, this is huge news. The fact that both India and China have agreed on disengagement along the LAC as well as ensuring patrolling. What has it really taken for this breakthrough to be achieved, Shivani?
See, I'm just out of the briefing that was happening of the Foreign Secretary, MEA, Vikram Misri, and he's very well announced here that there were several rounds of talks between India and China, both on the diplomatic as well as on the military fronts. We know that there were two consecutive WMCC meetings also that we saw in the last couple of months, and he said that both the countries have now agreed upon the resuming of patrolling because that had stopped after 2020, the Galwan incident that took place in June 2020. And now an agreement has been made between India and China, and the patrolling has already begun in these two places where the friction points remain. And to name these specific places, one was Depsang Plain, another one is Demchok. He's also said that very soon this engagement will also resume. So eventually disengagement will take place, and for now the big breaking is that the patrolling has already resumed between India and China on these two remaining friction points. We know that the other friction points where the disengagement had already taken place since 2021 and so on. And now these two places were remaining. One was Depsang Plains, another Demchok. So here also the patrolling agreement has been made between India and China, and the patrolling has resumed in these two places. That means very soon the disengagement process will also begin for these two places. So this is a big diplomatic win for India after these talks have succeeded. And very soon we can also see a meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping.
Is that confirmed, Shivani, that there will be a bilateral? Is that what was communicated to you, at least in that meeting?
Yes, we asked this question and he did not deny that this bilateral will not happen, but he also did not confirm it. He said that we are still working around the engagements of both the leaders, and very soon we'll be deciding upon these bilaterals happening on the sidelines of the BRICS summit, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be present for 2 days.
Shivani, I'm just going to interrupt you because we're getting in a reaction from the Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri. Listen in to what he said.
Over the last several weeks, Indian and Chinese diplomatic and military negotiators have been in close contact with each other in a variety of forums. And as a result of these discussions, agreement has been arrived at on patrolling arrangements along the line of actual control in the India-China border areas, leading to disengagement and a resolution of the issues. This is a multilateral event, though of course there is always a provision for bilateral meetings on the sidelines. We are currently looking into the overall program of the Prime Ministers. There are a number of requests for bilateral meetings, and we will update you on the bilaterals as they evolve as soon as feasible.
All right, let's bring in Gaurav Sawant on this broadcast. He's joining us live from Russia with more updates as we come down to the BRICS summit. Gaurav, this big development breakthrough between India and China comes just in the heels of the BRICS summit, where both Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping will be in attendance. We'll go across to Gaurav in just a bit to get you a live ground report from Russia. He's just touched down there to get you all the latest updates that come in on the BRICS summit, which is, remember, scheduled to happen tomorrow and the day after that. Shivani Sharma still remains with us. Shivani, what level of patrolling are we going to be seeing along the LAC? Has there been discussion and planned points between India and China where patrolling will happen now?
Certainly, Akshrita, this is a very big news because, you know, Indian Army and the diplomats, they were both working together for several years now. Remember, it's been more than 4 years since this patrolling had stopped after Galwan incident took place in 2020. And now this patrolling will resume from Demchok. That means both the armies will be patrolling to and fro to the initial points where they were doing it before the Galwan incident took place, both at Depsang Plains. And remember, the Depsang Plains and Demchok, they are not new friction points. They did not develop after 2020. These friction points have been traditional friction points between India and China, as they both have different areas of perceptions of their line of actual control. And the resolution that comes is about the patrolling arrangement of the same level that was happening before 2020. That means it will resolve the standoff at least between both the countries for the patrolling. The patrolling will resume. Another important thing out here is to mention that this will eventually lead to disengagement. The disengagement will begin. That means the tensions will be released between both the countries. There will be less number of troops along the LAC from both the sides. We know since after 2020, there have been over 50,000 soldiers along the line of actual control from both the sides. There have been tensions. There have been certain skirmishes also that were reported at certain points along the line of actual control. So now this tension seems to be easing out between India and China. And the timing is also important when Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be in Kazan for the BRICS summit, and Xi Jinping, the president of China, will also be there. So it's quite possible that after this breakthrough has been announced, both the leaders will be meeting on the sidelines of the summit. There will be a bilateral, and very soon we can get a confirmation from the MEA on this meeting, as the plans of both the leaders is being chalked out. But certainly a big news for the army and the soldiers who are deployed along the line of actual control. The coming days will see easing of some tensions between India and China there, especially at Demchok and Depsang.
Okay, so disengagement of troops along the border area has been the #1 priority, and that has been achieved in what is a huge breakthrough really in India-China dialogue. Just to recap, really, Shivani, of what happened in 2023 during the BRICS summit then. Even then, there was a lot of talk that we're going to see a bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping. It didn't happen due to last-minute differences. This time, however, with this update that's come in and this big breakthrough, it looks like the decks are definitely clear. Doesn't look like there'll be any last-minute hiccups that could create a problem or a hurdle in dialogue.
Certainly, Akshita, last time also there were expectations that Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be meeting with the President of China, but they could not meet there. But this time, the chances are pretty positive of this meeting because, the events that are now unfolding are paving a way for a meeting between both the leaders. It seems that this has been a big win for India, a big diplomatic win for India because, China and India have been on a standoff since last more than 4 years now. It will be 4.5 years and 5 years in June. But now, after several meetings, let me tell you, there have been 21 rounds of commander level talks between both the countries that also involved diplomatic level of representation too. So they were talking and they wanted a resolution. India always pursued that the line of actual control and the rule of the line of actual control must be obeyed by China. And there should be a trust factor between China and India. That's what India had been saying, and we've heard how a number of times the External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, has been saying and keeping India's stand very clear that we always believe in dialogue and a resolution through dialogue. And it seems, Akshita, now that success from this dialogue has been achieved because this is a big breakthrough where India and China have agreed upon a patrolling arrangement between both the countries along the line of actual control and very soon paving way for the disengagement. That means less number of troops from both the sides will be present in that location that have been a traditional friction point, be it Demchok, be it Depsang. And we know that several other points where friction prevailed after 2020 were already resolved after such kind of talks. But these two areas were, they seemed little difficult because these were not new friction points, but the traditional friction points between India and China.
Okay, Shivani, just stay with me. I want to play out for our viewers once again exactly what the Foreign Secretary said when he confirmed that there have been several positive developments as far as India-China dialogue goes. Listen in to what Vikram Misri had to say.
Over the last several weeks, Indian and Chinese diplomatic and military negotiators have been in close contact with each other in a variety of forums. And as a result of these discussions, agreement has been arrived at on patrolling arrangements along the line of actual control in the India-China border areas, leading to disengagement and a resolution of the issues. This is a multilateral event, though of course there is always a provision for bilateral meetings on the sidelines. We are currently looking into the overall program of the Prime Minister. There are a number of requests for bilateral meetings, and we will update you on the bilaterals as they evolve as soon as feasible.
Okay, Shiv Arora is also joining us on this broadcast, who's reported extensively on this border dispute for the last many years. Shiv, huge breakthrough. It's taken 21 rounds of dialogue, of talks for us now to reach this development, this breakthrough. But take us through, Shiv, what's been really the sticking points in really ensuring that there was an agreement on disengagement, at least along the LAC between India and China?
The standoff that began in 2020, Akshita, the friction points that became standoff zones between the Indian Army and the Chinese Army, disengagement has taken place in those areas, which is basically Pangong, Galwan, Gogra, Hot Springs and such areas. But the two sticking points that have remained legacy issues between India and China along the line of actual control in Ladakh have been the Depsang plains, which are the northern part of Ladakh, and Demchok, which is the other end of Ladakh, which is the southern tip of Ladakh. These two places have had confrontations between Indian and Chinese troops for many, many years. They date back to the UPA era and sometimes even before that. And therefore, resolving those particular legacy issues has taken a lot longer. There are some areas where the Chinese have had an advantage. They've denied patrolling routes to Indian troops. There are places where Indian troops have had the advantage and blocked a lot of passage for Chinese troops in those areas, though you won't hear very much about the latter. Resolving those confrontations have taken necessarily a much longer time because they are much more embedded, much more entrenched. The structures have taken place around them, and therefore disengaging over there and allowing patrolling to continue on both sides sounds amazing. It means that perhaps the most critically difficult and complicated sticking point between the two countries in Ladakh may be on the threshold of being resolved. I am still a little cautious about using the word breakthrough when it comes to India and China and Ladakh because sometimes things tend to be a little cosmetic. The Foreign Secretary has said this has taken days and weeks to actually arrive at a resolution, and we know that Foreign Service officers, Akshita, they never use words lightly. So to use the word resolution means that a very firm, specific decision has been taken to allow patrolling by both sides once again. But I would still hold off on commenting on the larger details of what has been agreed upon, especially in the context of the BRICS summit, because we will still have to see what patrolling is going to ensue in both Demchok and Depsang, and whether, most importantly, this is a return to status quo. If it's a return to status quo, it's an enormous breakthrough. It means the two countries have moved many, many steps forward.
Can you explain to us, Shiv, what's the current situation along the LAC? And now if, you see a disengagement along the LAC as communicated to us by the Foreign Secretary, how does that change things?
Look, these are large, high-altitude, areas in Demchok and Depsang where the distance between army posts is not very long. It's a few kilometers, sometimes, a few hundred meters. And these are areas where the perception of the line of actual control, which is the story of, much of the India-China frontier in that area, Akshita, is a matter of perception. The Chinese believe it is much closer to India. The Indians believe it's much closer to China. And there lies the dispute between the two countries. While India and China have managed to create some buffer zones and disengaged and pull back their troops from some dangerous friction points, especially in Galwan, where there was a violent clash in the Pangong area, south of the Pangong area, as well as the Gogra Hot Springs area, which is in central Ladakh. The Depsang and Demchok areas have been difficult to disengage from because of the much larger deployments of forces in those areas, including not just army troops, but also armor. We're talking about tanks and vehicles and, air defense weaponry and things like that. And therefore, pulling back from those areas, given the number of years that the standoff has been on in those two areas, has been much more complicated. Remember, and this is something we always have to remember when it comes to India and China, there is an enormous trust deficit. Building confidence between the two countries, especially in these high-altitude areas, is extremely difficult. If the two sides now, both at the military level and the government diplomatic level, have arrived at some kind of consensus, some kind of common ground in terms of pulling back, reviving the patrolling routes that have been blocked by China, and let me emphasize once again, Akshita, blocked by India as well. It's not like India has been a sitting duck in Depsang. A section of the media will portray it as in the Indian army being a sitting duck in Depsang. Nothing could be further from the truth. I have traveled there as well, and I can tell you that as many patrolling routes that are blocked by China, those are blocked by India as well. That's the reason why a resolution was necessary, because both sides stand to gain from it.
When would you actually go ahead and call it a breakthrough, Shiv? You're saying this at this stage cannot be called a breakthrough, only a resolution. Will it take a bilateral? Or will it take seeing that change on ground at the LAC, Shiv? It'll
have to be change on the ground, and that will have to be a political decision ultimately, Akshita. Because remember, even just a few days ago, even while we talk about this very heartening, positive, forward-looking news about the possibility of Depsang and Demchok, being resolved or being the subject of some kind of resolution. Remember, satellite images continue to stream in every other day of constructions that are taking place on the Chinese side. The large-scale deployment of the Chinese army in that particular area in Aksai Chin continues to be much larger than it is ever supposed to be. It is still a military standoff, and it's the largest military standoff in the world right now. Two nuclear neighbors with hundreds of thousands of troops deployed in one tiny frontier of eastern Ladakh is a warlike situation without any kind of exaggeration. When that entire de-induction of troops, there are three phases of a de-escalation. There is a disengagement, which basically means pulling the troops out from the absolute front line. Then there is a de-escalation, which is pulling back vehicles and other other assets as well. And then there's something called de-induction, which means moving those entire units away from that entire sector. So they're nowhere near the sector, so the possibility of a confrontation goes down rapidly. When that happens, then it's a breakthrough.
Okay, Shiv, just stay with me. I just want to bring in Shivani again, who attended that briefing and got us details of what really happened and what was the communication received. Shivani, while there's talk really of disengagement, has that already happened on ground, or are they saying eventually it will happen?
See, Akshita, we wanted to clarify and we asked the question again and again because, you know, this was something which was a news for all of us there because we wanted to know about Prime Minister's bilateral with Xi Jinping, if it's going to happen. And he said that since the plans are being worked out, I'm talking about Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri, who was addressing the briefing on the BRICS summit where Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be there in Kazan for 2 days. And he said that since this is the time, I also want to announce that India and China, after several round of talks between the diplomats and also the military level talks, we've been talking and we have been discussing. We've reached a point where the agreement has been reached for patrolling at those places where the patrolling had stopped between India and China after the Galwan incident took place in 2020. That means these 2 points which were remaining, the Depsang plains, the Demchok, where the friction remained and the patrolling was not happening by India and China. So this has resumed. And he also mentioned the term disengagement. He said that disengagement will also happen. This will pave way for disengagement. That means patrolling has already resumed, which means that the patrolling has already started there on ground along the line of actual control where the patrolling had stopped between both the countries after the Galwan incident took place in 2020. And to specify also, we asked him again and again, what does this mean?
Yeah.
He said that it's very clear that both the countries have reached upon an agreement on patrolling. That means that the patrolling will resume and eventually the disengagement will start very soon. That means
by
the strength
itself,
of soldiers
that
at
by
both the
itself
sides
is huge,
along
Shivani. And Shiv, just to bring you in on that, you know, the fact that you're seeing patrolling resuming is by itself huge. I'd just like to bring in also Mr. Raj Kadian on this broadcast. Sir, your view of the big update that's come in. The Foreign Secretary confirming to us that at this point, disengagement has been agreed upon. Patrolling has resumed along the LAC by both India and China.
Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
I have not yet seen the news except I have been informed by your channel. If China has indeed agreed to restore the status quo as it existed on April 2020, then it is a very good news. We need to congratulate our foreign ministry, our government, our diplomats, and our army commanders. That is what we've been wanting for the last more than 4 years, and they were not agreeing. If they've agreed, this is wonderful news, and I congratulate everybody, and I hope China will not repeat that kind of incursion again as they had done in April 2020, where we lost 20 of our young men, including a colonel. So it was a very sad development. It was a one-sided action by China on violation of the long-agreed line of actual control. I hope China now abides by the rules and this thing does not happen again.
Okay, thank you, General Kadian, for your view on this. Mr. S.P. Sinha is also joining us on this broadcast. Sir, your first reaction to the big update that's coming in with the government confirming that there has been significant developments along the LAC. Patrolling has resumed. There is a lot of talk about disengagement also, which will eventually happen between India and China.
You see, China is beginning to realize that the way China was trying to bulldoze India, it is not a workable solution. It will no longer work. It is not the government of the previous regime which is to kowtow, bend and try and please China. It is a strong government being led by Honorable Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi, and we believe in this government believes in only one maxim, tit for tat, jaise ko paisa. If China behaves in an irresponsible manner, India will give a befitting reply. Once this language has been understood, firstly. Secondly, China's economic condition is depleting day by day. It is in economic morass. It can no longer afford to take cross swords with India. That is the second issue. Third, India is emerging as a superpower. India is exercising its influence in the United Nations. India is about to become a permanent member with veto power. All this has become a point of worry because of concern from China. So therefore, China wants to buy peace. And if China wants to buy peace, India's message is very clear. You respect all the agreements which have been signed in the past with regard to territorial integrity. You respect our territory, and we'll have no problem. And that is how this patrolling has started.
All right, Mr. Sinha, I appreciate you joining us with your view on this. I'd like to bring in Gaurav Sawant. He's joining us live from Kazan in Russia, which is where the BRICS summit will take place come tomorrow. Gaurav, right now all eyes will be on the BRICS summit to see if this big development that's come in of disengagement between India and China will directly lead now to a bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping.
Well, all indications are that efforts are on. There could well be a bilateral between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Remember, last time they met, there was only a very brief handshake, that had happened in Indonesia. And after that, the two, while they have been in the same room at times, relationship has been frosty between India and China because of the situation along the line of actual control. And ever since the summer of 2020, India had made it very clear on more occasions than one that resumption of dialogue of normalization of relationship with China was only possible if the situation along the borders was absolutely normal, and that meant restoration of the situation of 2020 before Galwan episode. Now we are told that China and India are virtually on the same page on how that disengagement is to happen, and India is very clear. It's a three-tier process. There has to be disengagement, then there has to be de-escalation, and post-de-escalation there also has to be de-induction. The additional forces that had been mobilized, and 50,000 Chinese troops and more than 50,000 Indian troops, all along eastern Ladakh, they need to get back to their peacetime location, and all of that has to be gradual and verifiable on either side. So Akshita, it's a very, very important decision that the two sides have taken after practically 4 years of remaining in an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation, at least in two of the multiple friction points. Some friction points like Galwan and Pangong, so disengagement had taken place, and there the soldiers were virtually eyeball to eyeball. In some other situations, which incidentally in some instances predate 2020, there still is some forward movement, we are told. We need to see what else can be verified on ground by both sides.
But explain to us, Gaurav, why now? For so many years, we've been seeing attempts for this kind of a resolution to happen, for there to be some middle ground for India and China to reach. It's taken 21 rounds of talks for this moment. Why has it happened now?
China tried to browbeat India, and China realized that China was unable to browbeat India. You know, that salami slicing of Indian territory that's been on for decades. China realized it's no longer possible, especially when if they were bringing in 2 divisions plus, India had equal number, if not more, deployed, not just in Ladakh, but all along, whether it's the middle sector in Himachal Pradesh or the eastern sector in Arunachal Pradesh, also, in North Sikkim. And each time over the years, and we've reported from ground zero, I've reported all the way from Daulat Beg, Oldie, which is India's northernmost tip, where you have soldiers again deployed and in large numbers now, including mechanized columns are deployed there. Attack helicopters are now deployed there. China also realized after 4 years, India's deployment was not just defensive. China also realized that India cannot be browbeaten, and China also realized it's impacting its economy, it's impacting overall relationship, and India is the only country in the world that's not only standing up to China, but it's also encouraging other countries, across the region and the world to stand up for themselves. So it takes one strong country to give strength to others. And Chinese economy is also, going through a very difficult phase. Overall, if you look at the bigger picture, whatever President Xi Jinping wanted to achieve with that deployment, perhaps he thought he would be able to achieve that. it does appear that he hasn't been able to achieve those goals, especially now that there's confirmation at least on first step of disengagement. And then, of course, we'll see how much of de-escalation and de-induction takes place. So every step is verifiable, and India now no longer believes in that Hindi chini bhai bhai and sweet talk where you're stabbed in the back. India actually wants to verify every step. So over the years, 4 years is long enough for even China to realize that India is no longer a pushover, and India will push back. That pushback, whether in Arunachal Pradesh or in North Sikkim, or the deployment in the middle sector, in all of that in Uttarakhand, all of that seem to indicate that India has adopted a hard line, and this perhaps has gone a long way in persuading China that peace pays better dividends.
There was some similar developments that had taken place last year in 2023 before the BRICS summit again, Gaurav, that seemed to indicate that we were very close to having a bilateral that time too between India and China, between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping. What's different from 2023 to now? What was the hiccup that took place in 2023 that didn't allow that pull aside to take place?
India's insistence that there has to be action on ground. That big action on ground was extremely important, and India wanted that action on ground to ensure that there is disengagement that is taking place, disengagement that is verifiable and by both sides. And that formula was adopted. Those images came out, you'd recall, in the first step of disengagement. You had the Chinese tanks and Indian tanks virtually eyeball to eyeball like that. They were so close to each other, and China pulled back first and then India pulled back. But the speed of that disengagement also shows that China is in a position to deploy as quickly or redeploy as quickly. So India is also verifying that you disengage to a point where if you bring back your troops, you are also in a position to dominate that. Also, India, once again in good faith, while we were dominating their Moldo garrison on the Chota Kailash hills, India was actually dominating their Moldo garrison, and that was where China was taken completely off guard. China did not even in their wildest dreams think that India could adopt such a hard line. So overall, that impression has gone out, and we've seen the kind of deployment China has done all along the Tibetan plateau. India also started calling it India Tibet LAC, China realized a lot of things: their economy, the trade, cultural ties, overall ties. All of that seemed to indicate that business with China could not be as usual unless China withdrew its troops, from the multiple friction points. They'd withdrawn from most. Disengagement has happened from most. Now we need to see that China also marks those positions on map for forward movement to take place. And perhaps we will see some forward movement. It will be a gradual process. But then if you'd recall, even in Sundarongchu, it had taken 5 years for China to pull back in 1986. And Sundarongchu in that entire situation again showed China only respects strength. And perhaps this is now for India to understand. Hindi chini bhai bhai sounds very beautiful, but the moment you're strong on ground is when China respects you.
All right, Gaurav, thanks very much for joining us with all of those details and the perspective that you've given on that story. Gaurav will be reporting live from Kazan in Russia. The BRICS summit set to begin tomorrow, and there will be a lot of questions about whether with this development the decks are cleared for a bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping. Thanks very much, Gaurav, for joining us.